All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin with a beautiful daf ahead of us today. Begin by thanking Baruch Hashem, all of our sponsors for this morning share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for Tishrei, Dr. Linda Weinberg, Sarah and Ricky Gratz, Julia, Rena, and Eve, in loving memory of their husband, father, and Zayda, Dr. Paul Weinberg, Peres, Moshe Ben Avram, David. To thank Ayala and Sarah Steinberg for dedicating the Shurim this month, Neskusa Rafua Shalema for Shulamis Bas Susha, and Amnon Yudit Ben Zer for dedicating the Shurim and Drushos this month, Neskos of all of our tefillos being accepted. Our week of learning sponsors, Saeed and Simah Hagen, for the Rafua Shalema of their granddaughter, Talia Miriam Bas Orly Yehudit. To thank Greg and Rachel Levitan, in commemoration of the first yahrzeit of Greg's mother, Esther Bas Herschel, and in honor of Renewal, the organization Renewal, helping to facilitate kidney transplants. Incredible. To thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Bernard and Varda Birnbaum, in creation of the yahrzeit of Bernard's mother, Esther Fagel Bas Yehuda Leib. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas will have an aliyah, the families in Nechama, and all those who require a refuah should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. And with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Daf Peches 88, and we are picking up in Meretz Hashem on the bottom of Pei Zayin Amud Beis 87b at the two dots. Eid Echad Meida Shehi Perua. So again, just to reorient ourselves with this phrase in the Mishnah. So the Mishnah said as follows: Eid Echad Meida Shehi Perua. So what was the case of an Eid Echad testifying that the Kesuva was paid? So Ketzad, I'm just quoting you from the Mishnah for just a moment. Haisa Kesuva Elav Zos. Woman had a Kesuva Rachel. Rachel had a Kesuva of 1,000 Zos. Va'amar la hiskabalt Kesuva Seich or Kesuva Sayech. Ruvain says, I paid you already. V'hi omeres lo hiskabalti. She said, I never received the Kesuva. I'm just reading from the Mishnah. Ve'eid echad mida shi perua. And an Eid echad claims, no, you did receive it. So what's the halacha? Shabbos says, so now again, she's claiming, I never got paid. He's claiming, husband, I paid you. And an Eid echad supports the husband's claim. So what's the halacha? Lo tifra ela b'shvua. Ultimately, again, she's repaid. She could collect with a shvua. Good, that's the case. So it says the Gemara, Savar Rami Bar Chama Lememar Shvua Doraisa. Rabbi Chama says, so what's the nature of the shvua? What's the nature of the shvua? It's a shvua doraisa. It's a biblical shvua. Dichsiv Lo Yokum Eid Echad Bishlachol Avon Lechol Chatas. Torah says an Eid Echad cannot go ahead and generate an avon and a chatas, which Rabbi means what? Eid Echad cannot generate punishment. But what can an Eid Echad do? Aval Kamu L'Shvua. But an Eid Echad can generate an obligation to take an oath. See, it's the Torah itself that's telling me that an Eid Echad has the ability and capacity to generate the Shuvah. Amar Mar, Kamakom Sheshnai Mechayven Oso Mamon, Eid Echad Mechayvo Shvua. And Mar said again, I will say any situation where halacha l'maisa, and two Eidim would ultimately, again, be mechayiv you mamon, require you to pay money. An Eid Echad can't require you to pay money, but an Eid Echad can generate a shivua. Therefore, I will say, what's happening over here is as follows. Ryan Bar Chama is coming along and saying, this shivua that we make the woman take in this case, where she's claiming, I never got paid, my ksuva. Husband saying, yes, you did. Eid Echad saying, yes, you did. Now she has to take a shivua. The Eid Echad is causing her to take a shivua d'oraisa. Good. Amar Rava said, Shtei shuvas b'davar. Rava said there's two problems with this approach. Number one, Chada, Rabbi say in general, when it comes to a biblical oath, Rabbi say biblical oath is used for what purpose? Not to cause a person to pay, but ultimately what? To exempt a person from paying. In other words, that's when you're taking a shvua. You're taking a shvua to absolve yourself of responsibility. That's what a biblical shvua is. Here, what is the shvua doing? What's the shvua doing? Allowing her to collect. So the Gemara says, so tell us. So that's number one. We'll say furthermore, in general, we never have a shvua when there is a matter of denial of a monetary claim rooted in karka. rooted in real property. Again, a technical issue. When it comes to ksuva, this is a financial matter that is rooted in real property. Why? Because remember, again, the ksuva lien devolves upon the entire estate of the husband, including real property. Therefore, Rava comes along and essentially is saying, in other words, I want to be clear, Rava's not disagreeing with the Mishnah. In other words, the Mishnah's psak is, she's claiming she never got paid from the ksuva. Husband says, yes, you did. Eid Echad says, yes, you did. What's talacha? Shvua. What Rav is arguing on is Drami Bar Chama's premise that the shvua is a shvua da'oraisa. This is not a shvua da'oraisa, rather, Ela Amarava midrabanan. This is a rabbinic shvua. Why? Kadei lahafiz daito shel bal. Rav will say, because here's the issue. The issue is really, if you think about it, we have the husband's claim, an eid echad, but again, in order to go ahead and put the husband's mind at ease, that she's telling the truth, ultimately we administer a shvua. So therefore, halacha l'maisa, this is a rabbinic shvua. So the Gemara says something very interesting. Amar Rav Papa says as follows. Tap of Peichas. Ipi keachu. They both say if the husband is a smart guy. The husband is a smart guy. In other words, so the Gemara says if the husband essentially wants to utilize the halacha to his benefit, what could he do? See, I both say, what's the problem with the shvua d'Rabbanan? What's the problem? What's the only problem we could come up with? A person might not take a shvua d'Rabbanan as serious as a shvua d'Oraisa. It's been rumored that sometimes people cut corners with rabbinic law, right? It's been rumors. We have a friend, right? So we'll say, so again, with D'Oraisas in general, people are much more vigilant. So therefore, again, now that we've downgraded the shvua to a shvua d'Rabbanan, okay, so it comes along the Gemara, comes along Rav Papa and says, by the way, there is a way to transform this into a shvua d'Oraisa. This is actually very interesting. How do you do it? Listen to this. So here's what he should do. He should go ahead and pay her ksuva, ultimately, again, first of all, let me just point out, what is the difference between a shvua d'Rabbanan and a shvua d'Oraisa? So, of course, simple difference is, one is biblical and one is rabbinic. But look at Rashi. Lidei shvua d'Oraisa, tap Rashi, Peches Amud Aleph, shehi b'shem. So we'll say, first of all, a shvua d'Oraisa uses the name of God. A shvua d'Rabbanan is not. Furthermore, v'oches sefer Torah biyado. And we'll say, when you take a shvua d'Oraisa, you hold the sefer Torah. Ki darminim b'shvuas v'chamurehi ma'od. Aval shvua d'Rabbanan klala ba'alma ke'in shalanu. We'll say shvua d'Rabbanan is a klala. Right? What does it mean, a klala? Klala means like, essentially, the shvua d'Rabbanan is, you should be cursed if you're lying. If you're lying. Okay, I can live with that. In other words, let's say, so again, a shvua d'Oraisa, again, Shem Hashem, holding a Sefer Torah. So you could see already how you've upped the ante with a shvua d'Oraisa. There comes along Rav Papa. Rav Papa says there is a way to transform this situation into a shvua d'Oraisa. How? This is fascinating. Watch this. So Yav like subasa ba'ape chad sahada. So here's what you should do. They'll say, husband, so this is Reuven and Rachel. So again, just to highlight the case over here, same case. Reuven's getting divorced from Rachel, got divorced from Rachel. Reuven says, I paid you the ksuva. Rachel says, no, you didn't. Eid Echad says, yes, he did. Yes, he did. Now watch this. So what should you do? Here's the strategy. Pair the ksuva a second time. Pair a ksuva amount a second time. In the presence of another singular witness. And what happens? The samech sahada kama asada basra. Now Rabbi say, now you have two witnesses, right? What are the two witnesses both agree to? That he paid her the ksuva, right? Two witnesses, witness number one and witness number two. Umokim lahu lahanach kamai b'milva. And Rabbi say, now establish the first payment, not as a ksuva payment, but rather as what? As a halva, as a loan. Now what does that do? Take a look at Rashi. Umuki lahanach kamai balva yitba'ena piraon harishon v'yomer milvahein etzleich shari hiskabalt ksuva sayach shenis ukishetachbar v'tomar lo kibalti ela pamazos ve'ed echad meid al rishona ika shvua da'oraisa nishmas v'lo mishalemes. Wow. They will say, watch this. This is incredible. So the Rav Papa suggests as follows. If a husband wants to create a shvua d'oraisa, so go ahead, pay her ksuva second time in front of an eid echad. Okay? Now you have two eidim who both say, Husband went ahead and paid her ksuva, right? The first aid, the second aid. And now what? Say, you know what? The first thing I paid you wasn't your ksuva, but rather, again, it was a loan. If she now claims that there was never any lending of money, this now creates a shvua da'oraisa situation because ultimately she's denying a loan. So denying a loan now is a different kind of case which could generate a shvua da'oraisa. Says the Gemara, that's very interesting, but here's the problem. Maskefla Rav Shisha, Braid Rav Idi, Heich Samich Sada Kama Sada Basra. How can you combine the first aid and the second aid? Rabbi say, why not? Why not? They're testifying about two different things. Rabbi say, remember again, in this case, what is the first aid testifying about? What is he testifying about? About the original payment, right? And ultimately, again, what is the second aid testifying about? The second payment. You can't combine aidim like that to form a testimonial unit. Ella, they'll say, so again, Rav Shisha Berid Rav Idi, again, Rav Papa, you're right. You just have to tweak it a little bit. Yoev like suvasa ba'ape sahadikama visada basra. No. Pay her ksuva second time, and pay her in the presence of who? The first witness and a second witness. In other words, take the witness who supposedly saw the first repayment, right? And go ahead and bring them both together. And what happens? And same idea, establish the first money he gave her as a loan. And now Rabbi say, if she denies the loan, then ultimately that could generate a shvua da'oraisa. Okay, very interesting. Maskef Rav Ashi says, 1 second. Akat yechol lemeimar beis ksuvos havai. Ultimately, Rabbi say, but she can still claim that there are two ksuvas. In other words, he'll say, is there the possibility that a husband gave his wife two ksuvas? Sure. In other words, we'll say, you can give your wife whatever you want. So Maisa, maybe she'll claim, it wasn't halva, it was a ksuva. So the Gemara says, Allah Amar Rav Ashi, hudamodla. Hudamodla. Obviously, this whole thing only works. Halacha l'maisa, what? If the husband tells the edim what his strategy is with this. Okay, then we'll say, bottom line for our purposes, just to stick to the Mishnah. Ultimately, again, in the Mishnah's case, she's claiming, right? Reuven divorces Rachel. He claims, I paid you the ksuva. She says, you never paid me the ksuva. Eid Echad supports the husband. Yes, you did pay the ksuva. Say, what's talacha? She takes a shvua. Now we understand what kind of shvua? Shvua d'Rabbanan. Was there seen a shvua d'Rabbanan and a shvua d'Oraisa? Again, very important. The shvua d'Rabbanan effectively is just a klala. Not just, but is a klala versus a shvua d'Oraisa, which includes the name of Hashem and ultimately the holding of a Sefer Torah. Incredible. Let's go weiter. Nechasim mishubadim. So I'll say the next section we had, Nechasim mishubadim. So remember again, here the Mishnah said, what's the case? I'm just quoting to you again from the Mishnah. What's the case of Nechasim mishubadim? Ketzad? Machar nechasav la'achirin. We'll say, here's the case. Reuven sold his property to someone else, to others. V'hinifras min halakuchos. Ultimately, again, so we'll say, now here's the case. Reuven sold off all of his property during the course of the marriage. Whether he divorces her or dies, it's the same halacha. Now she wants to collect her ksuva. So she can go and collect her ksuva from properties sold over the course of the marriage. But if she does so, she can only collect it with what? With a shavua. That's the case of nechasim mishubadim. Says the Gemara, Tanan Hasam, v'china yisomim lo yifru ela b'shavua. So too I will say, when yisomim, orphans collect, they also could only collect with a shavua. So I will say, what's the case? Miman. Who are orphans collecting from? Ilema milova. If you want to say that the orphans are coming, right? So in this case, Reuven died, left behind orphans, and there's money owed to Reuven. So now the Yarshim, Reuven's inheritors, are coming to collect the debt owed to their father. So now you're going to tell me what? That Allah Chalamaysa, when the Yarshim come to collect from the borrower, from the lova, they can only collect with a shvua? Hashta avian shakal below shvua, vinu b'shvua. If Reuven were to come to collect from the lova, he would be able to collect without a shvua. They both say, why can he collect without a shvua? Because what does he have? A loan document, a shtar. So if Reuven could collect without a shvua, why would his kids, his yarshim, need a shvua in order to collect? Ella, halakam, that's what it means to say. It's very interesting. V'chein hayisomim min hayisomim lo yifru ella b'shvua. They both say, this is very interesting. If orphans are collecting from orphans, meaning what Rabbi say? So imagine the following situation. Reuven lent money to Shimon, right? So now, again, Reuven dies, Shimon dies. Reuven's heirs come to collect from Shimon's heirs. So what's the halacha? Even though, again, Reuven's heirs have a document, they still require what? A shvuah. In line with the halacha that any time you're collecting from nichse yisomim, from the estate managed by yisomim, you can only collect with the shvuah. Amar Zeka Avra Yehuda, lo shar el sha'amru, yisomim amar lanu abba livisi uparati. So both say this is very interesting. When ultimately, again, is a shvuah required, when the yisomim say, our father told us it's true that he borrowed, but he repaid already. Then ultimately, again, there's going to be a shvuah required. Aval amru, but if the Yisomim said, Amru lana Abba, loli visi, the ultimate was to imagine for a moment that the heirs of Shimon say, our father said he never borrowed money. He never borrowed money at all. Then what's the halacha? Af b'shvuah lo yifru. Even if the heirs of Reuben the lender are willing to take a shvuah, halacha l'maaseh they still can't collect from the estate. 1 second, the Gemara says, I'm asking for Rava. Adrab, I don't understand. Omer lo livisi, ka omer lo parati dami. I will say this is actually general law, right? The halachas of borrowers 101, which is if you go over to someone and you say you owe me money, and right, you have a shtar, and that person says I never even borrowed. So I will say saying I didn't borrow is the equivalent of saying what? I haven't repaid. So I will say if at the end of the day the yisomim of the borrower are saying our father told us that he never even borrowed. Whoa, 1 second. And I also remember again, there's a shtar over here. So ultimately, again, saying I didn't borrow is the equivalent of saying I didn't repay. If that's the case, the heirs of the lender should be able to collect even without what? Even without a shvuah. To which the Gemara says, you're right. Here's how you have to say it. Amr Bizreka, Amr Yehuda, Lo Shanu Elash Amr Yisomim, Amr Lanu Abba, Livisi Uparati. Aval Amr Lanu Abba Lo Livisi Nifran Shlo B'Shua. Say, when do we say that the Yisomim, right, that the heirs ultimately again that the heirs of the lender require a shvuah to collect from the heirs of the borrower? That's only in a situation where the Yisomim of the borrower say, our father told us, Livisi Uparati. Yes, he borrowed, but he paid back already. Okay, so now the heirs of the borrower are claiming, we'll call him Shimon. The heirs of Shimon, the borrower, the lover, are saying, our father told us he borrowed money from your father, from Reuven, but he paid it back. Now again, remember, the heirs of Reuven, the lender, are saying, listen, we still have the shtar. So the fact that we have the shtar seems to indicate that your father did not pay back. Fine. So now the heirs of Reuven are going to have to take a shvuah in order to collect from the heirs of Shimon. However, Amr lanu abali bisi parat. I'm sorry, aval amru. But listen to this: if the heirs ultimately again of Shimon the borrower say, Amr lanu abba lo livisi, our father never borrowed from your father at all, then nifra'in shelo b'shvuah. Then the heirs of Reuben the lender could collect even without a shvuah. Why? Shekala omer lo livisi ki omer lo parati dami. Because it will say anyone who says they didn't borrow is the equivalent of saying what? They haven't repaid. So we'll say, so bottom line, halacha l'maisa, here is the case. Here's the, and we'll say, so again, here's the case. Reuven lent Shimon money. Both Reuven dies, Shimon dies. The heirs of Reuven are now coming to collect the debt from the heirs of Shimon. So now what's the halacha? So if the heirs of Shimon say, yes, our father told us about the loan, but he claimed that he repaid it. So now what's the halacha? In order to extract repayment, Reuven's heirs, the lender's heirs, are going to have to take a shvuah, ultimately again to the borrower's heirs, that they did not receive any kind of repayment. Okay? But if halacha l'maisa, what happens? That the heirs of the borrower, right? Shimon's heirs claim, our father never borrowed anything from you. Oh, you claim you didn't borrow. Making a claim lowly visi is the equivalent of saying what? You haven't repaid. And in that case, the heirs of the lender, Reuven, would be able to extract payment even without what? Even without the shvuah. But I'll say why? Because what do they have in their hand? The loan document, the shtar. Beautiful. V'nifras shelo b'fanav lo tifra lo b'shvuah. So we'll say next interesting case in the Mishnah was as follows. Following situation. Shelo b'fanav, we'll say what's the case? I'm just reading to you the Mishnah. Okay, what's the case where a woman could extract payment shelo b'fanav, not in the presence of the husband? Halach lo l'medinas hayam v'hi nifras shelo b'fanav ein nifras lo b'shvuah. We'll say here's the case. Rachel got divorced. And what happened? She didn't get her Kesuvos payment. Now her ex, Reuven, right, conveniently relocated overseas. So what's the halacha? She goes to Beis Din. Beis Din says, okay, we'll extract payment from you, but what? You have to take a shvuah. Now, I will say, now what's the purpose of the shvuah in this case? Because what's the purpose of the shvuah? What's the purpose of the shvuah? To make sure that she did not already receive payment for a ksuv. That's what we're concerned with. Remember, Reuven is not present. Right? Reuven's overseas. So now she's claiming, I never got paid. We're Beis Din. We don't know if she get paid, if she didn't get paid. The only way to clarify if she did not get paid is to impose a shvuah upon her. If she swears that she never got paid, okay, then we'll extract money from the estate to go ahead and pay her ksuba. So let's go by this. It says the Gemara, Amar Ravacha, Sarabira, Maise Balifnei Rabbi Yitzchak ban Tuchya. One time a situation came up from Rabbi Yitzchak ban Tuchya. Va'amar, he said to us, Lo shanu el ksubas isha mishum china, aval bal chov lo. Rabbi Yitzchak said this halacha that will extract payment from a debtor, so to speak, not in the presence of the debtor, only applies to ksuva, doesn't apply to any type of debt situation, right? Why dafka by ksuva? Shabbos say you see that halacha l'maisa by ksuva, we have a vested interest in making sure that a woman feels secure financially. So therefore, again, if a woman knows that when she gets divorced and her husband is a flight risk, she's not going to get paid her ksuva, that may make her reticent to enter into marriage. So how do we calm her? We tell her essentially, even if your husband is a flight risk and he runs away after divorce, it's okay. Beis Din will seize assets in order to go ahead and ensure that your ksuva is paid. But this does not apply in other cases of debt. So, for example, Reuven lent Shimon money, right? And now, ultimately, again, time for payment comes. Shimon runs away overseas. The Gemara says over here, or I should say, Rabbi Yitzchak said, we will not seize assets of the debtor, not in the presence of the debtor, in order to go ahead and satisfy his debt. We won't do that. Now, watch this. For Rav Nachman, not true. Afilu Balchov, it's not true. Even for a debtor, right? If the borrower fled, he's nowhere to be found, we will go ahead and seize his assets in order to go ahead and settle the debt. Why? I will say very simple. Because I will say, if we don't do that, what do we have to be concerned about? People are going to exploit this all the time. They're going to go ahead, borrow money and what? Flee. Relocate. And I will say, what's going to effectively be the result of that? Va'at deles bifnei lavin. See, I will say, remember again, as I mentioned this last week also, in general, right? Lending money as a Jew is already not financially advantageous, right? I'm not lending with interest. So now, if halacha l'maisa, a person could borrow money, leave town, and Beis Din is not going to seize any assets, then l'maisa, what's going to happen? You're going to totally destroy the loan market. Because people will just say, why should I ever lend money if very simply a person could escape paying their debt by simply relocating somewhere else? Therefore, I will say, halacha l'maisa, Rava says, no. Beis Din, just like Beis Din intervenes in the case of a husband who's left town, will seize assets to pay the ksuva, the same halacha applies to a debt as well. And if the borrower left town, ultimately, again, will seize assets in order to pay off his debt. I will say, that is indeed the halacha l'maisa. Good. Fighter Shimon Omer. So we'll say this is interesting. So remember again, the end of the Mishnah ended off with a statement of Reb Shimon, right? And what did Reb Shimon say? Reb Shimon said the following, just to quote Reb Shimon said, anytime that she claims her ksuva, ultimately again her heirs will administer, the yarshim of the estate will administer a shvuah. If she does not go ahead and claim her ksuva, then what? Ultimately, the heirs will not go ahead and administer a shvuah. Okay, Rabbi say the problem we have is we do not know what Rabbi Shimon is commenting on. What is that statement going on? Here we go. Here we go. Rabbi Shimon Ahayo. What is Rabbi Shimon going on? In other words, which part of the Mishnah is he commenting on? So here we go. I'm Rabbi Yirmiyah. She's commenting on the following case. He's commenting on the immediately preceding case. Namely, that halacha l'maisa, if she wants to go ahead and get paid out her ksuba from the estate, and her husband is not present, what's the halacha? She can only collect with a shvuah. The Gemara says, Lo shna lemizoni, v'lo shna leksuva. This is true, by the way, whether she wants to extract money for mazonos, for ksubos. Remember again, when a woman is widowed, specifically in the case of widowed, halacha lemaisa, she is supported by the estate. She receives mazonos from the estate. Now, when does she receive mazonos from the estate? Until she claims her ksuva. Once she claims her ksuva, mazonos ends, she gets paid out the ksuva, and that's it. So listen to this. The Gemara is saying, this halacha, when she wants to extract money from the estate and the husband, and let's say there's no one there now, right? So halacha ma'isa, whether for mazonos or for ksuva, when she wants to extract money, she's going to require a shavua. Very interesting, even for mazonos, she requires a shavua. So the Gemara says, no, calls mash shetovas ksuvasa yarsha mashpianosa amud beis. So Rabbi Shimon comes along and says, no. So according to the Tanakama, listen to this. According to the Tanakama, Rachel is widowed. Now she wants to extract from the estate either ksuva or mazonos. Tanakama will say, whenever a woman wants to extract something from the estate, the only way to do that is how? With a shvua, even for her own mazonos. Now both say, it doesn't mean she's going to have to go ahead and swear every single time she wants money for mazonos from this, because that's an ongoing process. But it means the first time, before she goes ahead and gets money from the estate, ultimately again for mazonos, she is going to have to take a shua that there's been no prior payment. Comes on Reb Shimon, disagrees, says, no. The only time a woman has to swear when it comes to the estate is when? For ksuva purposes. For ksuva. However, Eino Tovas ksuva, but if halacha l'maaseh, if she's not claiming her ksuva, even though she's claiming what? Mazonos, Ein Yarshin Mashpiyan Osa. The Yarshim do not have the ability to impose a shvua. And therefore, according to this approach, V'kamiflagi beplukta dechanan o b'nei kohanim gidolim. And according to this approach, the machlokes Rabbi Shimon and the Tanakama is the machlokes of Chanan and the b'nei kohanim gidolim. So I'm going to have to do a little bit more research on this. I don't know who this is. The B'nai Kohanim Gidolim. Like who is this? Who are these people? Again, I didn't have a chance to do it last night, but I'm going to look into this today. B'nai Kohanim Gidolim. This is not. What's their machlokes? Here we go. Mishalach l'medina sayam. If a man went overseas, and what happens? He forgot to leave support for his wife. Okay, this says a lot about their marriage, right? It says a lot about this guy. But Lamaisa again, he went overseas. He was very busy, right? He went overseas. He forgot to leave mazonos for his wife. So what's the halacha? Ve'ishto tavas mazonos. Now his wife comes to Beis Din and is claiming mazonos. What's the halacha? Chanan amar tishava besof velo tishava betchila. So Chanan says, no. She doesn't have to take a shvua. In other words, she only has to take a shvua at the end. We'll say at the end means when she claims her ksuva. A woman does not have to take a shvua when claiming mazonos. Nechluku Allah b'nei kohanim gidolim. The sons of the kohanim gidolim disagreed with Hanan, and they said, "Vamru tishava b'tchila ubasof." No. Any time a woman is extracting money from the estate of her husband, it requires a shvua, and therefore Rabbi Shimon kichanan, Rabbi Shimon Rabbi holds like Hanan, v'Rabbanon kibnei kohanim gidolim. So therefore, Rabbi, according to this first view of the machlokes, Rabbi Shimon is disagreeing on Tanakama on the following point. Tanakama holds any time a woman is taking a draw against the estate, that always requires shvua. So in the Mishnah's case, halacha l'maisa, Rachel was widowed. Reuven died. She's claiming mazonos from the estate. Tanakama says shvua. You have to take a shvua if you're claiming money against the estate, right? At the end of the day, comes on Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Shimon says, no. The only time you're chayiv shvua is when you're claiming your ksuva. That's the machlokes. So Rabbi says, the Gemara says as follows: Amar maskif. Ask Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes says, here's the problem with that interpretation. Hi yarshin mashbiyan osa, Beis Din mashbiyan osa mibayle. Rabbi say, here's the problem with the Mishnah. Here's the problem with that version. The lashon of the Mishnah Rabbi say is kolzman. Rabbi Shimon says kolzman she tavas ksuvasa yarshin mashbiyan osa. Anytime she claims the ksuva, the yarshim impose a shvua. According to this approach, it shouldn't say Yarshim. What should it say? It should say Beis Din. Because remember again, what's the case? The way you just set it up, the case is where she's coming to Beis Din to claim mazonos. So it's not the Yarshim are imposing a shvua, it's Beis Din. So therefore, again, that can't be the interpretation. Therefore, we'll say another interpretation. Okay, and we'll say, remember, keep your eye on the ball. We're just trying to figure out. Rabbi Shimon is disagreeing with the Tanakama, right? With the Rabbanan in the Mishnah. We're just trying to figure out which case is he disagreeing in. So here we go. Ela Amar of Sheshes, aha. Right? He's disagreeing in the following case. If a woman literally left the grave of her husband and went back to her father's home, which is an expression. In other words, they're both saying she goes from death of her husband back to her father's home, or she goes back to her father-in-law's home, but he'll say, but she does not assume any level of financial responsibility for the estate. Right? So she has not assumed, so she's not managing the affairs of the estate. What's that? What did the Mishnah say? Ein hayarshim mashbiyan osa. The yarshim cannot impose any type of shavua upon her. The nasis apetropia, but I will say if she does become the apetropia, the executor of the estate, then what? Yarshim mashbiyan osa al ha'asid lovo. The yarshim ultimately could what? I will say could administer an oath going forward. Ve'ein mashbiyan osa amasha avar, but they cannot impose a shvua on what was on the past. Okay, that was the Tanakama. Therefore, Rabbi Shimon comes along and says, no, Kolz Manshe Tavas Ksuvasa Yarshin Mashpiano, so Eina Tavas Ksuvasa Ein Hayarshin Mashpiano, so. Listen to this, Rabbi Shimon says, no, not true. Even if she's the apotropis, right now, even if she's the executor of the estate, the Yarshim cannot impose a shvu upon her, not only for past transactions, but also for future transactions, because the only time Yarshim can impose a shvua upon the widow is when? When she is coming to collect her ksuva. That's it. Any other time, even if she's handling the financial affairs of the estate, the Yarshim cannot go ahead and impose a shvua upon her. And therefore, I will say, according to this approach, v'kamiflagi, beplugta da'al b'shal v'rabanon. I will say, according to this approach, the machlokes is the machlokes of Abashol and the Rabbanon. What's the machlokes? Here we go. This nan apetropis shemino avi yisomim. We'll say if the father, right before he passed away, appointed an executor of the estate. So we'll say what's the halacha? So Yishaba, he has to take an oath. He right that he's dealt correctly with the estate. On the other hand, that's if he's appointed by the father. Mino Bezdin lo Yishava. If he's appointed by the Bezdin, ultimately again he does not have to take an oath. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. Abishal says Chiluf Adar. No, just the opposite. Minu Bezdin Yishava. If he's appointed ultimately by the Bezdin, he is obligated in fact to go out and take a shavua. Mino Avi Yisomim lo Yishava. If he's appointed by the father, ultimately again he does not need to take an oath. So we would say, Rabbi Shimon Kabashal, Rabbi Shimon holds like Abashal, but Rabbanon ki Rabbanon, and the Rabbanon hold like the Rabbanon, which makes sense. So Maskifla Abai says, here's the problem with that. Kai Kolz Mashet Tavas Ksuba, Lashon of the Mishnah shouldn't be any time she claims the Ksuba, rather what should it say? Im Tavas Mi Boile. It should say, if she claims the Ksuba. I was say, if you're making this, so just to be clear, in this version of the machlokes, in this version, what's happening over here? What's happening in this version? In this version, we're saying like this. The machlokes is, what happens if she becomes the executor of the estate? Do the Yisomim have the right to impose a shvu upon her? The Tanakama says, yes. Rabbi Shimon says, no. Because Rabbi Shimon will say the only time that Yisomim have the ability to impose a shvu upon the widow is when she's coming to collect the ksuva. But under any other circumstance, they do not have the right. Here's the problem. If that's the case, then the Lashon of the Mishnah shouldn't read any time she collects the ksuv. Rather, what should it read? Im tova'as mi boile. It should read, ultimately, if she comes to claim her ksuva, ultimately they can impose a shvuah. So I will say, so therefore, again, we're back to square one. And I will say, we have a very simple mission, which we have not yet accomplished, which is, what case is Rabbi Shimon commenting on? Therefore, switching gears again. Allah Amr Abaye says, aha. He's coming to comment on the following case. Kasav leneder ushvua inni alayich. If a man says to his wife, I have no neder or shvua against you. So in this case, he frees her. He frees her from any neder and shvua. Right? They both say, this was the previous Mishnah. Right, neder and shvua. Right? So Giving Gemara says, what's happening over here? Kasav law, neder or shvua in the. So husband writes to the wife, puts in writing, I have no neder or shvua on you. So what's the halacha? In the yachal ashbia. So he cannot administer a neder or a shvua to her. Now watch this. Neder ushvua ainli velo liarshi, velo lebaim birshu si alayich. Now husband expands that and he says, just like I have no neder or shvua upon you, none of my heirs or descendants can have any neder or shvua upon you as well. And then he says, right, velo lebaim birshu si alayich va'al yarshayich va'ala ba'in birshu seich. So we'll say, and then he expands it. So I have no neder shvua upon you or any of your descendants, nor do my descendants have any neder shvua upon you or any of your descendants. What's the halacha? What's the halacha? And yachal ashbia. He has no ability to impose a shvua upon her. Furthermore, lohu v'lo yarshav v'lo habayin birshuso lohi v'lo yarsha v'lo habayin birshusa. So I will say. So the halacha is like this. The halacha is like this. A man makes, let's go with the most expansive form of this commitment. A man puts in writing, right? Reuben puts in writing to Rachel. Rachel, I have no nidarim against you, right? No nidarim or shvuos against you, or against your offspring, or against your offspring's offspring for who knows how many generations, right? Beautiful. How many generations, I will say. Then what? And then he says, by the way, my offspring, my generations, right? So essentially what he's doing is over here, there's a multi-generational patur, right? A multi-generational exemption. Neither me nor any of my heirs could go ahead and impose a shvu or an neder upon you or any of your heirs. Beautiful. Pretty straightforward case. Now what happens? V'asar Rabbi Shimon comes along, Lemimar, Kolzman Shetovas Ksuva, Yarshin Mashbiin Osa. Rabbi Shimon comes along and says there is an exception. What's the exception? When Rachel claims her ksuva. When Rachel claims her ksuva, Rabbi say the halacha is the Yarshim are permitted to go ahead and administer a shavua. That's the exception. So Rabbi say it's incredible. See, even though, remember, what did Reuven put in writing? What did he put in writing? I have no neder. I have no right to impose a neder or shavua upon you or any of your future generations, nor do any of my heirs have the ability to impose. So Rabbi say, watch this. So Reuven dies. Rachel shows up to go ahead and collect her estate, to collect her ksuv from the estate. And what does she produce? This document that says that what? She could collect without a shvua. So Tanakama says, okay, she's got the document. There's nothing more to talk about. She's got the document. Therefore, halacha l'maisa again, she could collect her ksuva without a shvua. Comes along Rabbi Shimon and says, no, this is the exception. This shvua to collect suva from the estate was not covered by the patur. And even though, again, she's freed from every other neder in shvua, she's not freed from the shvua in order to enable her to collect the ksuva from the estate of the Yisomim. Incredible. Ben Ima Miriam v'Rabbanon. And Abba say, this is a throwback now. Throwback machlokes. Who doesn't love throwback machlokes? A throwback to Daf Peizayin Amud Aleph. Rabbi say, what happened on Peizayin Amud Aleph? What happened on Peizayin Amud Aleph? I don't remember 5 minutes ago, right? Let alone Peizayin Amud Aleph. Okay, but this is the good part of getting to prepare this year. So I actually underlined these lines. So I'll say, remember again, on Peizayin Amud Aleph, we had the statement of Abishol ben Ima Miriam. Abishol ben Ima Miriam Moshe said, Kevan, I'm just going to read it to you. Kevan, Bein de lo shvua, bein dinaki mishua, bein de lo neder, bein dinaki neder, bein menichse, bein menachasya, ilay beinu, bein yarshav, amru chachamim, haba lipar menichse, yisomim lo yifra. Both say, listen to this. So Abba Shalom made the following statement. He said, both saying, there is a halacha. What's the halacha? It's a rabbinic law. And what is the rabbinic law? If you come to collect from nichse yisomim, what do you need? A shavua. Chazal instituted, so let's go back for a second. Why did Chazal institute this? That whenever you come to collect from the estate, now owned by the orphans, you have to take a shavua. Why? Why did they institute it? We'll say this was to protect the Yisrael. Remember again, Reuven dies, leaves behind heirs. The heirs may very well not be versed in the affairs of their father's estate. So therefore, what's the concern? The concern is that they are easily exploitable. That's the concern. So how did Chazal ensure? I mean, you can't ensure anything, but how did Chazal at least take steps to try to prevent anyone from exploiting the Yisomim? How do they do that? How do they do it? Shavua. So Shavua, Rabbi say, remember again, Shavua says, people are going to think twice before exploiting. So Rabbi say, here's the clash. So therefore again, Abba Shol ben Ima Miriam, said the following. Even if a man makes an agreement with his wife, freeing her from any nidarim or shvuas, it doesn't take away the rabbinic obligation to swear, but for collecting from the estate. In other words, that halacha, you cannot make a side agreement to go ahead and undermine a halacha. And therefore, we'll say, even though he freed her from every other neder and shvua, halacha l'maisa, the obligation to make a shvua when you collect from nichse yisomim is still in effect. So we'll say, that's the machlokes. Here we go. So the Gemara says, so Rabbi Shimon kabashol, v'rabbanon ki rabbanon. So we'll say, that's what's unfolding over here as well. So therefore, we'll say in our Mishnah, what's unfolding? Husband, while he was alive, Reuven said to his wife Rachel, I hereby exempt you from any neder and shavua. And that patur applies ultimately again to who? All of your descendants. And none of my descendants can go ahead and impose a neder or shavua as well. Fine. Fast forward. What happens? Reuven dies. Rachel shows up at Beis Din to collect her ksuva. Right? So what happens, Rabbi say? So the Yisomim are saying to Beis Din, she has to take a shavua. Right? Rachel's saying what? What is Rachel saying? I don't need a shavua. What does she produce? The document in which her deceased husband said, I free you from every single neder and shavua. The Rabbanon say, listen, Reuven made the agreement, therefore Rachel can collect even without a shavua. Comes along Rabbi Shimon about saying, Rabbi Shimon says no. Rabbi Shimon says, Kozmanchi Tovask Suvasa Hayarshin Mashpirinosa. Rabbi Shimon says no. That when he frees her from every neder and shvua, that's true for every other neder and shvua except for the one that Chazal instituted when it comes to collecting from the estate of Yisomim. In that case, everyone has to take a shvua. That's the machlokes. Says the Gemara, Maskeh v'rapapa, here's the problem. Hatinach kozman shetovas ksuvasa, eina tovas ksuvasa, ma'ika l'meimar. Says the Gemara, halacha l'maisa, that's fine. Ultimately, again, when she's claiming her ksuva. I understand that's machlokes. What happens if she's not claiming her ksuva? Rabbi say, take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Hatinach kozman shetovas, asalafuke midrabanan, the amri af mishvuas hayisomim petura, v'nefras below shvua, v'asrei b'shimon l'meimar, lo tifra lo b'shvua. So I understand if she's coming to claim the ksuva, that's the machlokes. However, eno tovas, the maskana de milsa, l'may tani la'afuke miman. Rabbi say, what about, here's the problem. What about in a case ultimately where she's not claiming her ksuva? So halacha l'maisa, again, how would we understand what is Rabbi Shimon coming to add? To which the Gemara says, you're right. Here we go, Rabbi say. Therefore, the Gemara says, Ella amra papa la'afuki med Rabbi Lazar umachlakuso. Okay, what is Rabbi Shimon coming to argue? Rabbi say, Rabbi Shimon is coming to argue on an earlier statement. Rabbi say, he's coming to argue on Rabbi Lazar in the previous Mishnah. Rabbi say, remember again, what's Rabbi Lazar in the previous Mishnah? So Rabbi say, this is going back a little bit. This is going back to Pei Vav Amud Beis. What happened on 86b? So Rabbi say, this was the Mishnah of a man who goes ahead and establishes his wife as the chembonis, right? She runs the family store. Or she's in charge of the estate. What's the halacha? The Mishnah said, he can administer an oath upon her whenever she wants. In other words, since she's handling the financial affairs, he could impose a shvua upon her at any time to make sure that she's being honest. Rabbi Eliezer came along and said the truth is, even if she's not the apotropis, and even if she's not managing the family store, he can still impose a shvua upon her at any time. Why? Based al pilcha va'alisasa, based on her spindle or her dough. Meaning, Rabbi Eliezer said, she's always in charge of certain financial aspects of the home. So because she's always in charge of certain financial items, therefore he could always impose a shvua upon her to make sure that she is remaining honest. So the Gemara is suggesting over here that Rabbi Shimon in our Mishnah is coming to dispute that entire piece. I will say, take a look at Rashi. This is an important Rashi. Second last Rashi on the Daf. Ela Amra Papa la Fugim Rabbi Elazar Machlakuso Kilomar Lo Tema Rabbi Shimon Akasav La Neder Shvua Lochad Pligi Ela Akule Most Rabbi Elazar Bnei Machlakuso Pligi Areisha V'Seifa Shemit Kamar listen this Kamar Rabbi Elazar V'Rabbanon Mashbia sorry Kozman Sherot says Shvua Sapetropia Hechad Lo Patra Ben Aneder Ben Ashvua V'Afilu Shelo B'Shas Tivias Kesuvasa V'Im Patra Ben Ashvua Afilu Yarshin Ein Mashbinosa Kishnefar. So let's listen to this. In the previous Mishnah, the Rabbanon and Rabbi Eliezer agree with this concept that if a woman has financial responsibility in the household of her husband, what could the husband do? What could the husband do? Impose a shavua whenever he wants. Whenever he wants. So again, it's a machlokes of when. In other words, according to the Rabbanon, if she's like in charge of the store, she's in charge of the finances, or she's the apotropis, the husband has a right to impose a shavua whenever he wants. Rabbi Eliezer takes that even further and says, even if she's not the apotropis, right? Even if she's not the or running the store, but again, a woman always has certain financial matters under her control, even if it's just her spindle and her dough. And therefore, in this model, Rabbi Eliezer says a husband could choose to say, "Take a shavua that you're not misappropriating assets." Comes along Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says, "Absolutely not. Absolutely not." Finish Rashi. V'asar Rabbi Shimon l'meimar. Kozman shetavas ksuvas yarsha mashbir nosa va'afilu kasav leneder ushvua ein liyarshi alayich kabashol ein tavas ksuvasa ein yarsha mashbir ala petropia shebechaye baila va'afilu lo parcha ben hashvua. So let's listen to this. Comes along Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Shimon is coming to go ahead and fundamentally dispute and repudiate that previous model. Rabbi Shimon says, it does not make any sense that a husband could just at his whim impose a shavua upon his wife. Doesn't make any sense, right? What kind of marriage is that? What kind of setup is that? Rather, what is Rabbi Shimon Rabbi coming along to say? Rabbi Shimon saying, halacha l'maisa, there's only one time that a husband, so to speak, could impose a shvua. And when is that shvua? Rabbi when is that shvua? When she comes to collect her ksuva. That halacha l'maisa says when he could impose a shvua. But outside of that, there is no mechanism ultimately, again, for the imposition of shavua upon the wife. So therefore, I will say, bottom line, that is the maskana as to the statement of Rabbi Shimon. So interestingly enough, Rabbi Shimon his statement is actually not going on any part of our Mishnah, but rather, again, his statement is really going on the previous Mishnah on Peivav Amud Beis, which set up a model that a husband can impose a shavua upon his wife as long as she has any level of financial, responsibility, right? If she has any level of financial responsibility, whether she's running the family business or just her own stuff, her spindle and her dough, you can impose a shuvah. Rabbi Shimon says absolutely not. The only time you can impose a shuvah ultimately is halacha l'maisa, when she comes to go ahead and collect her ksuva. Now, both say, so first of all, so what is the halacha l'maisa? So the truth is, there's a lot of halacha l'maisa. I just want to isolate 3 points. Number one, Rabbi say that there is a din d'Rabbanan that whenever you come to collect from the estate of Yisomim, you have to do so with a shvua. And the way you pass in Rabbi say is, even if a husband freed his wife from any other neder and shvua, it doesn't matter who you are or what you've been exempted from. If you are coming to collect from the estate of Yisomim, you could only do so with what? With a shvua. That's halacha ma'aseh number one. So Rabbi say, we do paskin that if a wife is running a business, right, that the husband does have the ability ultimately to go ahead and impose a shvua, but only in certain circumstances. So again, those halachos are a bit more involved, so we're not going to get into them now. But bottom line, we do pass like Rabbi Shimon, namely, that whenever she is coming to collect from the estate of the Yisomim, she can only do so with a shvua. Rabbi say, shkoyach. Okay, good. The daf. Baruch Hashem. Chavron Eretz Yisrael. Jerry, Moshe Ben Sion. So good to see you, Paul. Good to see him. Paul's not in Eretz Yisrael, but all right, mamish, incredible. The chilek in being in Eretz Yisrael with the two of you. Have a great day, everyone. Gemar Chasima Tova.